All right, this is Note 7.2. We're going to walk through how to do Punnett squares. All right, this is probably one of the most fun parts of biology. Typically, when upperclassmen talk about when they took biology, even if they didn't do well in biology, they will tend to say, oh, but I remember doing Punnett squares, or I liked biology. I really like the Punnett squares part. Like, that's just the part that people love to take away from this, and it's usually the thing that people remember when they think about biology. So now we're finally getting to it here, talking about how to diagram and visualize how traits are passed on from parents to offspring, and it actually allows us to predict what the chances are that offspring will have certain traits depending on what traits their parents have and what the genetics of their parents are. All right, so Punnett is named after a guy whose last name was Punnett, but Punnett squares were basically used to diagram some concepts that Mendel himself discovered. So again, we're going to go back to Gregor Mendel here, who again was this monk in modern day Austria who loved his pea plants, and so he experimented with them. All right, so if you remember, there were some pea plants that he had in his garden that he was experimenting with. Basically, he started pollinating their flowers and was keeping track of what traits they had. So when he took the sperm inside of pollen from a purple flower, okay, he took that and he pollinated a white flower. Okay, do you remember what the offspring was? It was actually purple. Okay, actually the purple wasn't exactly this purple, it was more like this purple. I'm going to color code this a little bit differently here. Purple, okay? So he only had purple flowers, which is super weird. I mean, you combine purple and white, and he got only purple. And so that was a little strange. But then what he did was he took that a step further, and he actually took that purple offspring, and he pollinated them together. So he took the sperm from a purple offspring and pollinated it to another purple flower. And that was really weird because then he had some purple flowers and some white flower offspring. Oh, okay. So purple plus white equals only purple, and then purple plus purple equals purple and white. What's going on here? All right, that's a little weird. So to kind of show a diagram of this, we're going to kind of visualize this. Okay, so here's his original white flower and his original purple flower. And we actually deem this, we call this the P1. P1 generation. P meaning parent. All right, so it's just, yeah, we don't usually use P2, we just say P1, okay? So what he did was he took these flowers and he pollinated them, and they had all of these offspring, okay? So we're just going to represent that by these 4 purple flowers. Well, then what he did is he pollinated this guy to this guy, and they had some offspring. And, oh dear me, my pen's not working here. And when they did that, look what happened. They had some purple and some white, okay? Now, if these were humans doing this, it would be called incest. But these are not humans. These are plants. And so it's fine. Basically, the brother married the sister, and they had these offspring. The brother purple flower married the pink flower. There you go. Okay, so that is a way you could say that. So incest within flowers, but it's fine because they're plants. So basically, we have this white flower that is the grandchild, in a sense, of this purple one. Okay, we actually we call this one F1. Oh bother! Here we go. F1, and we say this one's F2 generation. F1 comes from the word filial. It's Latin, and it means son or daughter. So it's basically the daughter generation here. All right, so F1, I'm going to say that here. I'm just going to define that as my first offspring. And then those first offspring pollinated each other, and you get your second offspring, which basically are like the grandkids. Okay, so these are like the grandparents, the parents, and the grandkids, basically. Okay, or the parents' offspring, second offspring. All right, so we learned this last time in 7.1. When he crossed purple and white, he had all purple flowers. When he crossed tall and short, he had all tall plants, which means what? Well, it means that all the tall are dominant. So we have a dominant trait. Here we had round and wrinkled, so we know that here this was round pods, so the round was dominant. Okay, so we had 100% dominant inside of our first generation. So we had 100% purple, 100% tall, 100% of the offspring were round pods, 100% were yellow pods, 100% were round peas, and 100% were yellow peas. I said yellow up here and I meant to say green. Let's change this up here. Whoops. Green. Boy, writing in all these colors is making my head hurt. Okay, so that's what he did when he crossed them first. But then what he started doing was he started crossing these purple flowers with themselves. And he actually recorded these numbers. So these are the actual numbers that Gregor Mendel recorded in the 1800s. What you'll see is that he had 705 purple flowers and 224 white flowers. Now, I want to calculate the percent of the dominant trait. How am I going to do that? Well, what I would do is I'd simply add 705 plus 224. Okay? That's going to give me my total. Okay? When the 705 and the 224, when I add those up, I'm going to get 929. So if I want to find the percentage of dominant, I'm simply going to divide 75 by 929. So when I take 705 and divide that by 929, what do I get? Well, the answer I'm going to round. So I got approximately 75.9% purple. Okay, so about 76% of the grandkids were purple, and then you had 24% were white. What I want you to do is I want you to pause this video, and I want you to calculate the dominant trait percentages for the remaining P's. Okay, so figure out what percentage of the F2 generation had the dominant trait. Pause this video and figure that out. All right, after you've calculated that, you should have found that 74.0% of them were tall, 79.4% were round pods, 73.8% were green pods, 74.7% of the F2 offspring had round peas, and then 75.1% had yellow peas. Well, that's super weird. What's going on here, okay? So first off, we had 100% of them in the first generation, and then in the second generation, after these incest peas, okay, we get about 75%, or about 3/4 of them have the dominant trait. And we can kind of represent that here. So about 3 out of 4 had the dominant trait, and 1/4, or 25%, had the recessive trait. What on earth is going on? All right. So in the F2 generation, we can say about 3/4 of the pea plants had their, recessive traits. We're saying 1/4. Okay, about 1/4 of the pea plants had the recessive traits. Another way we could say this is a 3-to-1 ratio. Okay, so that means for every 3 dominants, I have 1 recessive. All right, so one way to visualize what's happening is we can represent what's happening using a Punnett square. All right, this is going to help us predict the probability of the offspring's genotype and phenotype. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to represent the F1, or sorry, this is going to represent the parents creating the F1 generation. Okay, so inside of these boxes is going to be the F1. Actually, let's do that up here. F1. Okay, so what I have is I have a purple parent, and I'm just going to put the female up here. So let's say that this is the female flower. I could have put her down here, but I'll just put her up here, okay? And what was the genotype of my original purple plant? Well, I would have to tell you this because we know that it was purple, so we know that it at least had one dominant one. But the ones that Mendel was working with were called true breeds, meaning that they were kind of purebred. They were homozygous dominant is what that meant. So we know that the mother here had a BB. Okay, so that's this one right here. So this flower has a BB, and this one right here has a little b, little b. Okay, because it's recessive. So BB, little b, little b. So if I go down here, how am I going to represent that? Female's at the top. I'm going to put the male to the side. So this is the white flower. So I'm crossing the white flower with the purple one. I'm going to put a little b and a little b. Okay, so this is my genotype. On one of the chromosomes, I have the capital B dominant allele. On the other chromosome, I have the capital B dominant allele. Okay, this is for flower color. So there are several possibilities for how these could match up. I could have this bee come down, and when it gets pollinated, maybe this allele combines with it. All right? Keep in mind, the sperm only carries one of these. So this is just exploring, well, which one would it carry? The possibility. Maybe this one paired up with this capital B from here. All right? And you can basically fill out the rest of them by bringing down and bringing across these different factors. Okay? So what this means is that when I have a mother, okay, let's actually label this, okay? So let's label the mother pea plant. We're going to say that this is the egg from the purple parent. Never thought you'd hear that word. Egg from the purple parent, okay? And then here we've got the sperm from the white parent or the white flower. Okay? So maybe the sperm's going to carry this one allele. Remember, it's haploid. It's only carrying one of these. So if it does, it's going to combine like that. You'll notice, what's the phenotype going to be of all the offspring? Well, every single one of them has a dominant allele. So that means that this is going to have a purple flower, and this is going to have a purple flower, and this one's going to have a purple flower, and this one's going to have a purple flower. And you know what? That's exactly what Mendel observed. Because when we go back up here, notice how when we crossed these two, we had these offspring. That means that all of these had this genotype. Okay, this one came from the male sperm here, and then this one came from the egg here. Okay, the purple came from the egg, the white came from here. So what happens is, that's a way to visualize this egg masked or covered up all of the recessive traits that this flower could have given. So we only had purple. Now what happens if we cross these two purple flowers? Well, keep in mind they have these alleles. So if those two match up, you could get a white flower. So let's visualize this, okay? I'm going to visualize me creating the F2 offspring. Okay? So I'll pick the female up here again. All right? And we know because it's these two, so like we're going to cross these two, okay? I know that I have a B, or it's going to pass on that little B. Okay? I'll even put the or here. Or it's going to pass on that one. Here, the sperm, which is a purple flower, from a purple flower, it contains the purple allele, but it also contains the white allele. And it's going to pass on one of those. Okay? Now, what are the chances, and remember this Punnett square is just showing me the probability of different possibilities. What are the chances that it's going to have a purple flower? Well, here, let's say that the sperm sends this allele, and the egg sends this allele. What is my offspring going to be? It's going to be homozygous, it's going to be dominant, so it's going to be purple. Well, let's say that the sperm gave a capital B dominant purple allele, and the egg gave a lowercase recessive white allele. What color would the offspring be? It'd still be purple, because you have that dominant trait. Okay, now I'm going to take this capital letter and I'm going to cross these, so maybe the sperm gives, from the purple flower, gives the gray allele, and then the female egg gives the purple one. Guess what? It's still going to have purple. But now, wait a minute. What if this one flower gives the B allele and this one flower gives the B allele to the little small B allele to its offspring? Well, then its offspring, it's going to be white. They're going to have a white pea, all right? A white flower. So, because it's both recessive. There's no dominant. And remember, the cell is going to read those versions of that gene because it doesn't have a dominant one to read. Wow. All right, so what can we visualize from this diagram? This Punnett square shows us the possibilities of the phenotypes. So here we have a 25% chance, okay, of there being a white offspring. And chances are 75% of the time you're going to have a purple flower. Purple offspring. Which, guess what? That makes total sense, because when we look back up at Gregor Mendel's data, chances were 75% of the time you'd have a dominant trait. 25% of the time, the recessive would show up because you'd pair up the homozygous recessives. Okay, which is why here we had this flower was BB, this flower was this, and then this flower was this. Okay, so here, these are just different ways. So if I combine these two, I'd get this flower. If I combine these two, I'd get this one. If I combine these two, I'd get this one. And if I combine these two, I'd get this one. So that's why 25% of the time I get that. Now, this is all chance. It'd be kind of like if I took a dice. Here I have a dice. You can't see it. But there's 6 sides, and so there's always 1/6 of a probability that it'll land on a certain side. Or if I think about a coin, if I flip a coin, then there's always a heads or tails chance, right? There's a 50-50 chance that I'm going to land on heads or tails. Here, I have 2 alleles, and here I have 2 alleles, so that's 4 different ways that I can combine those. So each of these is going to be a 25% probability. But because these have the same phenotype, I just say 75% chance of them being purple. Okay, so that's how I fill out a phenotype. Let's think about this a little bit more in terms of chromosomes. Why is it that sex cells only pass on one allele? Well, if you remember, okay, so like here, it's only going, the sperm is only going to pass on one, okay? And then the egg is only going to pass on one. It's not going to pass on both. It's only going to pass on one of those. Why is that? Remember, egg and sperm are created in the process of meiosis. Okay? Remember, normal body cells they have two sets of chromosomes. So we call those diploid. Two sets. They have two sets of chromosomes. But meiosis separates the chromosomes to create haploid sperm or haploid egg cells. So they have half as much. Okay? So that means, like if I think up here, okay, even though a normal body cell has two, it only passes on one. Okay? And that's because the egg or the sperm is only going to pass on one. Okay? And that's what we see here. Normal body cells have two chromosomes or two alleles on those chromosomes, but a haploid egg cell only has one of those, so it's only going to pass on one. So normal body cells always carry two alleles, but sperm and egg only carry one allele, because that one allele is going to combine. The one allele from the sperm is going to combine with the one allele from the egg to create an offspring that has two alleles. Keep in mind, in meiosis, when you separate those chromosomes, it's totally random. So some sperms might carry a dominant allele, other sperm cells might carry a recessive allele. So the Punnett square is going to explore both of those possibilities. We can also use the Punnett square to predict what the sex of the offspring is going to be. So for instance, like if a child's going to be born, is there really a 50-50 chance that it'll be a boy or a girl? Or, maybe is it more likely for people to have girls? Or is it more likely for people to have boys? Or is it equal? Well, let's diagram this out. We can just represent chromosomes instead of alleles. So I did females up here last time. I'm going to do males this time. So you can put a male or a female on the side. It doesn't matter. But when you do draw a Punnett square, always put the male or female sign on the side so that I know what you're talking about. Okay. Unless I tell you you don't have to put it there, then don't. Because for some puzzles you have to solve, you might not know, but in most cases you will. Okay, so the male, let's say the male could pass on what? The male could pass on either an X or he could pass on a Y. And we know that the female, she has an XX chromosome, so she can only pass on an X or an X. Go ahead and fill out this Punnett square. You can pause the video. All right, so after filling this out, you should have gotten this, all right? Bring that X down, bring that Y down, bring that X down, bring that Y down. All right, what's the phenotype? Here, this would be a boy, girl, girl. Not Euro, girl. Okay, so look at that. We have the 50-50 chance. Okay, so the likelihood of being a male is 50% chance, and the likelihood of being a female is a 50% chance. Okay, if there were 4 kids, chances are, probability, 2 of them would be boys, and chances are that 2 of them would be girls. In this case, the boy gets the Y chromosome from the mother, and the girl gets the X chromosome from the father. Sorry, Y from the father, X from the father. Okay? Remember, it's the father that decides. So it's always the father's fault, whatever the sex of the child is. Okay? Another way we could say this is that it shows a 1-to-1 ratio. What does that mean? For every girl that I have one boy. So 1, 2, 1. That's how you read this. 1, 2, 1. Okay? Notice the boy can only get the Y chromosome from the father. And if you think about it, where did the father get his Y chromosome from? Well, he would have gotten it from his father. He could not have gotten it from his mother. And his father would have gotten his Y chromosome from his father. So that means that this boy right here, he has his grandfather's X chromosome, the father of the father, because it just keeps getting passed down, and the great-grandfathers and the great-great-grandfathers, okay? Maybe it mutates a little bit along the way, but for the most part, he has his father's Y chromosome, who has his father's Y chromosome, who has his father's Y chromosome, okay? So this kind of like leads to an interesting discussion, because when you think about this, the father is going to pass on a chromosome that the mother cannot pass on here. And so when you think about it, this boy has half of his DNA from his father and half of it from his mother. And you might be tempted to think that he has 25% from each grandparent. Okay, if we kind of thought of, here's grandpa on the mom's side, grandpa on the dad's side, grandma on the mom's side, grandma on the dad's side, and they have, here's the mother, and then here's the father. All right, and then here's the boy. Okay, very simple diagram. Okay, so here the father's mother and the father's father here. So those are the grandparents. Okay, so this boy has 50% from his mother and 50% from the father, but you would think he would have 25% of their DNA, 25% of their DNA, 25% of their DNA. That's actually not true. He does not have that. And that's because it's random what alleles the mother will pass on. And you can most clearly visualize this with the X and the Y chromosomes. Okay? So a boy would not get his Y chromosome from his grandfather on his mother's side. Okay? So for instance, this mom only has XX. So she cannot pass on the XY that the grandfather has. So that means that this Y chromosome is never going to be passed on to the grandson. So if that father only has daughters, his Y chromosome will cease to be passed on, which is kind of sad. Aw, it's fine. Okay, so, which is super weird. Okay, so a boy would not get a Y chromosome from his grandfather on his mom's side, because she can't pass on the Y chromosome. She doesn't have a Y chromosome. And so this always leads me to ask, well, where did Jesus get his Y chromosome from? Because Jesus would have been XY, but his mother did not have a Y chromosome. So Joseph, he wasn't doing anything there. So where'd he get it from? I guess, the Holy Spirit must have miraculously created a Y chromosome to give Jesus, which is kind of crazy. So if Jesus had had kids, he would have passed on this brand new Y chromosome in the human population. But of course, he didn't have kids, so that would have made things really complicated. All right, so there's your thoughts on the Y chromosome. Okay, so you can do this with almost any trait. So if you want to do this with red hair, for instance, this kind of explains why you might see a family that has maybe 2 brown-haired parents and a child with one child with red hair. Okay, a fourth of the kids could have red hair because it's recessive. Red hair is a recessive allele. Okay, here in this example, I just give a mother who has red hair and a father who does not. And what are the chances? Okay, the chances are that 50% of the kids would have red hair. And 50% would not. So this is important. This is just, you can read this on your own, and if you have trouble with the homework, you can reference this appendix here to kind of remind you how to read one of these things and what these tools are used for. But these are going to be super useful in tracking diseases as well. So if you remember that video we watched on the girl who was blind, none of her parents were blind, but she was blind. And the reason is because they each carried an recessive allele. So maybe they, let's do blind for G, okay, or for B, okay? So if the mom and the dad had these genotypes, then the daughter could have been this. So she would have been blind. So that's what happened there. That's why the parents weren't blind, but she was blind, okay? And we can use Punnett squares to visualize those. All right, you will be given homework. That homework will help you practice creating these Punnett squares and just interpreting what they mean. And so you can move on to that after you have filled out your notes. I'll be uploading that to tomorrow. So yeah, there's your Punnett squares tutorial.